Today, an incredibly tragic story awaits us. A story of chance and human foolishness. The story of the sudden death of climber Pete Absolon in the Rocky Mountains of the United States. Now hit the like button and let's move on to our story. And, as usual, we'll start from a distance. On August 11th, 2007, 47-year-old Pete Absolon and his partner Steve Hurley decided to climb a challenging route in the Rocky Mountains of Wyoming. Pete had been going into the mountains for more than 17 years. He was an experienced climber, knew the area well, and was an exceptionally cautious man. However, this journey would have an ending that no one could have predicted. They planned a difficult ascent along the Wind River Range in Wyoming. The peak rises to 3,600 meters. It was visible from Absolon's home in the town of Lander. But in 17 years of climbing in the area, Pete had never entered the cirque of this mountain before. A glacial cirque is a kind of amphitheater-shaped basin in the mountains. At the end of July, he had hiked to Leg Lake with his wife Molly and their 6-year-old daughter Avery. During that short trip, he studied the cirque, especially a long wall that curved around the lake. 2 weeks later, he returned with Hurley to attempt the route he had envisioned. Climber Steve Hurley later recalled that he was flattered to be invited on such an ascent. Pete Absolon was selective about his climbing partners. Despite their significant age difference, Pete was 47 and Steve was 30, they got along well. The two men had met in 2001, 6 years before these events, at a mountain guide seminar. Since then, they had often hiked and climbed together. Pete Absolon was sturdy, fair-haired, athletic, and wore a constant smile. He had recently become the director of the Knolls Rocky Mountain branch, while Hurley had enrolled in law school at the University of Wyoming. Pete planned the climb meticulously, seemingly calculating every detail. On Saturday, August 11th, they were already at the base of the rock face. Rising early in the morning, they crossed a scree slope and then climbed about 100 meters up steep slabs to a small ledge where the route Pete had devised began. The ascent was slow and difficult. They found a couple of old pitons beneath the ledge, but beyond that, there was nothing. Apparently, no one had climbed this route before. There were many loose rocks along the way that could break free, injure the climbers, or even kill them. Absolon climbed the first overhang above the ledge, then 2 more. Hurley did his part, belaying, hauling, and placing protection. By the end of the day, they were about 50 meters from the grassy ledge beneath the cliff that they had set as their goal for the day. Pete Absolon was setting protection. Hurley was slightly below him and to the right. They paused for a few minutes, discussing how to handle the final section, a widening crack that bent to the right. By that point, Steve Hurley was already exhausted. He was ready to retreat and descend to camp. But Pete insisted on finishing the last section and fixing the rope so they could return the next day and complete the route. Steve agreed. The section did not look difficult. It seemed like they just needed one final push. Then, in the middle of their conversation, something suddenly hurtled down from above. Steve Hurley later recalled it this way. There was no warning, just a sudden crack, and then a kind of white noise. The light went out, and in my head there was nothing but a continuous ringing. As soon as I heard the sound, I instinctively pressed myself against the wall. A moment later, whatever had been falling was gone, leaving silence behind. When Hurley looked up, he saw Pete hanging on the rope, staring straight ahead. His eyes and mouth were open. He was completely motionless. Hurley pulled himself up. His hand touched the back of Absolon's head and felt warm moisture. He turned his friend around and saw fragments of a white helmet, blood, and a shattered skull. Hurley remembered. His face was completely unharmed. It was perfect, but I knew he was dead. I'll pause the story for just a moment for a short but important note. Friends, I've launched a new channel called Chaikin's Bestiary. There I talk about mystical phenomena, creatures, and folklore. If you enjoy mysterious stories from the past, you're very welcome to join that channel. You'll find the link in the description below. I truly appreciate your subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares. Now let's return to our story. The Leg Lake Cirque was known to the Rodolph brothers from Casper as the Chinese Wall. They had visited the area several times before, ascending by a steep but manageable route through the neighboring Upper Silas Canyon. 28-year-old Aaron and 23-year-old Luke had been to these scenic places many times. They arrived from the town of Casper at the trailhead on Thursday, the day before Absolon and Hurley left Lander. Their group included Aaron, Luke, their older brother Isaiah, Eli Rodolph, a cousin from South Dakota, Eric McDonald, a family friend, as well as their wives and girlfriends. In total, 8 adults and Isaiah's 4 children. They set up camp by an unnamed lake and spent Friday fishing and grilling. It was a family outing and a wonderful camping trip. On Saturday, Luke and Aaron decided to take Eli and Eric to the Chinese Wall. Although the trail up the canyon ended at Island Lake, the 4 continued toward the upper wall of the Cirque. They reached a cliff that offered a magnificent view of the surrounding peaks and the town of Lander in the distance. They spent about half an hour there, admiring the scenery and tossing rocks down. Later, Aaron estimated that the group had pushed 4 or 5 small boulders off the cliff. He recalled, "It was really interesting to watch the rocks fall. You could see every bounce, every impact, all the way down to the glacier." Luke led them to the edge of a precipice. He climbed a few meters up, looked over the right side, picked up a piece of granite about the size of a bowling ball, and hurled it into the void. Then he crouched and looked over the edge to watch the rock fall. From his position, he had an unobstructed view of the terrain below. To his surprise, he saw 2 men in white helmets about 70 meters beneath him. At the very moment he noticed them, the falling rock struck one of the men directly in the head. Climber Steve Hurley could not see where the rock had come from and assumed it had fallen naturally. In the silence that followed Absolon's death, panic overtook him. He feared more rockfall. He later said, "I was 100% sure that the next rock that fell would hit me. I didn't have enough experience to descend on my own without Pete's protection. I was trapped." Hurley tried to retrieve the gear he would need for the descent from his deceased partner. Pete Absolon's blood poured over Hurley's body, onto the rope and his backpack. He considered lowering the body, but decided it would slow him down and might cost him his life. An hour later, he managed to descend to a safe ledge. There, he tied the ropes together and secured them for the final descent to the base. Once on the scree slope, he ran toward the car, constantly stumbling in his climbing shoes. Hurley plunged his head into the lake, trying to wash off Pete's blood that covered him from head to toe. There even seemed to be a metallic taste in his mouth. In the twilight, he looked around, unsure what to do next. Then he saw 4 young men running toward him. The first of them was crying. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Aaron Rodolph said, breathing heavily after the long descent. "What happened, Arthur? Hurley asked. A pale, thin young man stepped forward. "I threw the rock," he said. Hurley stared at him. "Did it hit another rock or something?" "No," Luke Rodolph said. "It hit your friend." Hurley needed time to process what he had just heard. This man had thrown a rock and killed his partner. Hurley did not know what to say. What came out of his mouth astonished the Rodolph brothers, who apparently expected him to attack them. He looked at Luke and said, "I forgive you." The 4 men gathered around Hurley. Aaron hugged him and asked if he would mind praying together. Hurley nodded, and Aaron began to murmur quietly in the dusk. Eventually, Steve Hurley would have to tell people what had happened to his friend, to explain how one of Lander's most respected and experienced climbers had died because a stranger, for amusement, had thrown a rock from a mountain. Later, he would have to recount the details of this story again and again to sheriff's deputies, colleagues, the Absolon family, friends, and acquaintances. But before that, 15 long hours passed before he had the chance to tell anyone anything. First, he had to endure a long and agonizing night with Luke Rodolph, the man who had killed his friend. Aaron told him that he had called 911 and that help was already on the way. Hurley later recalled that they spoke with Luke for a long time, and Luke believed he would go to prison. Of course, the incident caused an uproar in the small town of Lander. The community was filled with anger and outrage. Many also recalled their own encounters with rock throwers that had nearly cost them their lives. Others pointed out that climbers themselves often knock rocks loose, not only to clear a route, but also, so to speak, for gravitational fun. According to data collected by the American Alpine Club, falling objects are the third most common cause of injuries among climbers. Perhaps the most notorious case was the incident in 1994 that triggered a 50-ton rock fall on the north face of Granite Peak, the highest mountain in Montana. 3 young climbers had been throwing rocks down, apparently believing there would be no problem because the north face was a difficult and rarely used route to the summit. Unfortunately, 33-year-old climber Tony Rich was in the path of that rock fall. All 3 were charged with creating a hazardous situation and received a combination of fines, community service, and jail time. But let's return to our story. A few days after Absolon's memorial service, County Attorney Ed Nelson announced that he would not file charges against Luke Rodolph. The prosecutor classified the incident as a climbing accident, which, of course, sparked a wave of outrage among the deceased climber's family and those who knew him. Pete's wife, Molly Absolon, stated, "I just lost the father of my child. I am angry. I am in despair. I believe Rodolph got off very lightly." The prosecutor also noted that Luke Rodolph immediately accepted responsibility, cooperated with the investigation, had no prior convictions, and was a veteran of the war in Iraq. Luke Rodolph himself said, "Sometimes you feel that you have to pay for what you've done. At that moment, I accepted that it was God's will, but I take full responsibility for what I did. Pete's death was my fault, and I will never be able to justify myself. Surely many of you have also tossed pebbles in the mountains, watching them fall. People often do foolish things without thinking about the consequences, and one small stone caused an enormous rock slide of human destinies. It forever changed Luke's life, the man who threw that rock and will remember this mistake for the rest of his days. It forever changed Hurley's life, in whose arms his companion died. It forever changed the life of the Absolon family, who lost a father and a husband. And it forever took the life of climber Pete Absolon. Such was the rockfall triggered by one tiny stone. Write in the comments what you think about this. It will be very interesting to read. Don't forget to like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.